It is my honor to introduce our keynote speaker, Ka Julie De Lima, Chairperson of the Negotiating Panel of the National Democratic Front of the Philippines. She will be presenting lessons in our history, women engaged in struggle. Please welcome Ka Julie De Lima.
Comrades and friends, I am most honored by your invitation to give the keynote address to your third International Women's Assembly. I hope I can cover my subject well, because, well, anyway, if I don't, Comrade Asra has already done a very comprehensive address on the tasks of the women's movement. It has been fairly well established by anthropological evidence that women have had a very decisive role in bringing about civilization. In primitive society, the women who seem to have been dragged down by their natural function of pregnancy and childbearing and childbearing have been responsible for the development of settled life, and with it the rudiments of agriculture and animal husbandry, for which they also have to develop a whole collateral series of techniques, including the storage and preservation of food. Thus, they developed handicraft, pottery, and the uses of fire, even medicine, and the rudiments of other sciences came to be developed by women. As primitive women labored collectively, they were decisive in the development of language and speech. The priestesses, who became the repository of collective knowledge and skills of primitive community, are said to have preceded their male counterparts. It was precisely the productive labor of women that initially relieved the men from the rigors of food gathering and enabled them to attend to other areas of human endeavor. From hunting, they began to develop warfare, secure territories, and build larger communities and move on to civilization. Mere division of labor between the sexes laid the basis and gave way to class divisions. Ironically, it was the productive labor of women that laid the basis and ushered in the development of class society, from the primitive communal society where women were equal to men to slave society. With the development of civilization and the rise of exploitation or exploitative societies, the women came to be relegated to a subordinate status even as they continued to be engaged in productive labor. Their contribution to productive labor as well as other endeavors came to be increasingly undervalued or even denigrated from the time of the slave society through feudal and on to capitalist society. In various periods in world history, there were women who led the people in fighting despotic rulers and invaders. Some examples are the heroic struggles of the Vietnamese Trung sisters, who became military leaders and succeeded in winning the first rebellion against the Chinese Han Dynasty's occupation and domination of Vietnam in AD 40 to 43. The Philippines' Gabriela Silang in 1763 and the women in the Paris Commune and the Petrograd Uprising. Women such as Clarisse Kim, Alexandra Kollontai, and Rosa Luxemburg have inspired others to the indispensable and imperative role of women in the struggle against imperialism, feudalism, and patriarchy. Women need to reaffirm the militant and revolutionary tradition of the women's movement, especially at this time, that the U.S. imperialists have perverted the cause of women's emancipation against feudal patriarchy and so-called Muslim fundamentalism to justify invasion, occupation, and wars of aggression as in Iraq, Afghanistan, Libya, Syria, Yemen, and Kurdistan. U.S. imperialism reduces women's liberation simply as a matter of individual right or a gender war against the opposite sex in order to hide the fact that its definition of equality is no more than the right to be exploited and oppressed for being a mere sex object of male chauvinism and Purunians. U.S.-led imperialism's pretense at advocacy for women's rights transforms women into chattel for multinational corporations and commodity for labor and sex markets. U.S.-led imperialism proposes to bring so-called democratic rights to the women while it holds them prisoner by brute force in alliance with local reactionaries in economies that create an endless supply of impoverished women to exploit in their own homes or in sweatshops. Under global capitalism, women comprise 75% of the 1.3 billion who subsist on less than US $1 per day. Majority of the 800 million impoverished and hungry are women and children, even though women produce 60% of the world's food supply. In the developed countries, women's benefits from health care to overtime pay are under assault through corporate greed. Governments cut social benefits, reducing pregnancy leaves and welfare support. Hard-won women's rights and welfare are eroded or even eradicated to satisfy the lust for profit of the monopoly capitalists and the ruling classes. The advanced capitalist countries, while reaping profit from underpaid migrant labor, enact xenophobic laws. To stifle protest against such unjust laws, these same governments pass legislations that enable them to repress immigrants. The majority of the world's immigrants are women. It is ironic that these same governments that stoke anti-immigrant sentiments encourage disguised forms of trafficking. In other words, official programs for importing workers, including the mail-order bride system. At the other end, governments of the developing and underdeveloped countries enact and maintain their labor export policy. This is the world that women's number one enemy, imperialism, has created for womankind, a world of oppression and exploitation of entire nations, the working people and women, a world of intolerable suffering and relentless violence unleashed by imperialists and their minions. The tasks of Iwa. Lenin teaches us that the proletariat cannot liberate itself without liberating women, and Mao also teaches the obvious fact that women hold half of the sky. The participation of women in revolution is a liberating process for women and is a measure of the advance of the revolution. Male comrades have the obligation to struggle against women's oppression so that women are encouraged and are themselves engaged in the liberating process. Women's organizations and alliances like IWA are necessary for the current and future struggles to assert women's economic, political, and cultural rights as equal to those of men. IWA must resolve to promote the crucially important role and initiative of women and women's organizations in advancing and realizing their own distinct demands as women, cooperating with their menfolk as equal partners, and contributing to the general movement for national liberation, democracy, and socialism against imperialism and all reactions. In the wake of the betrayal and reversal of socialism and the consequent adverse effects on the national liberation movements, the imperialist powers and their reactionary puppets have undertaken all kinds of offensives against the working people and distinctively against women. Everywhere in the world today, it is the women and the children who suffer the most. It is of crucial importance that IWA arouse, organize, and mobilize women throughout the world to rise up against imperialism and all forms of reaction that bedevil them and the rest of the people. IWA must address the multiple oppression and exploitation that women suffer in the hands of imperialists, feudalists, and patriarchalists. You must increase your determination to trace the milestones of the struggle of women for liberation and upliftment. Examine the current social, economic, political, and cultural conditions of women. Confront the rising level of class exploitation, the global economic and financial crisis, imperialist wars and violence against women, and set forth the tasks for advancing a militant global women's movement in this century. It is necessary that you focus your attention to the plight and struggle of the most oppressed and exploited women, those who are workers and peasants, those who are forced to migrate, those who suffer racism, discrimination, and genocide, those, or all of us, who suffer increasing ecological disasters engendered by monopoly capitalism, those indigenous women who are being displaced from their ancestral domains, those in areas engulfed by imperialist wars and state terrorism, those subjected to religious oppression, sexual prejudices, restrictions of reproductive rights, and violence, and others. You must resolve to emulate and support the struggle of women on all continents and countries, and to give special attention to outstanding and concrete struggles of the women of Palestine, the Philippines, India, Pakistan, Afghanistan, and elsewhere. Women's emancipation is impossible under imperialism. Women must continue to expose and oppose the ruling bourgeoisie and the state for feeding them lies about the goodness and permanence of capitalism and imperialism. The goriest and most despicable manifestation of moribund imperialism is the ceaseless outbreak of aggressive wars, the destruction of lives and property, and displacement of millions of people as a result of economic and financial crisis. 4 out of every 5 persons killed in the wars unleashed by the US and its imperialist partners and puppets in Iraq, Afghanistan, Libya, Syria, Yemen, and Kurdistan, and the continued occupation of Palestine in West Asia are women and children. They also comprise 80% of the tens of millions of refugees forced to flee their homes and homelands because of conflict, oppression, or impoverishment. In the course of the revolutionary struggle, women advanced their struggle for gender equality by participating and assuming positions of responsibility, as well as performing various other tasks traditionally reserved for or monopolized by men. Women would find fulfillment and assume responsibilities on equal footing with men. By their own struggle, women achieved total equality. By liberating themselves, women help men liberate themselves from material conditions and prejudices that imprison and stifle them in all class societies. Women must organize themselves to strengthen the working women's movement against multiple oppression that they suffer. The women's movement must raise the revolutionary consciousness and militancy of its members and fight for liberation against imperialism, its policies of neoliberalism and aggression. Women must stand with all progressive organizations and join national liberation movements in fighting repression, militarization, imperialist plunder, and war. They must stand together and fight for national and social liberation against imperialism and all reaction. They must not forget those before them who risked their freedom, dignity, and their lives for the gains, small though these may be, that they enjoy today. They must defend these gains as these are constantly under attack. The women's liberation movement must grow in strength and have the determination to actively resist imperialism, feudalism, and patriarchalism. Women all over the world must get involved in different forms of struggles as they carry their fight in picket lines and trade unions, street demonstrations, parliaments, and urban centers. And most importantly, engage themselves in people's wars for liberation. Women must assert their right with the Revolutionary Brothers to change the world. In this regard, IWA must forge a strong women's anti-imperialist front and solidarity the world over. Through organizations and alliances such as IWA, imperialism, feudalism, and patriarchy are now facing the growing strength and active resistance of a determined women's liberation movement. Women struggle against the world of darkness maintained by imperialism, assert their rights, and act in concert with the Revolutionary Brothers to change the world. Let us forge a powerful women's anti-imperialist front and build solidarity the world over. Thank you.
The women's place is in the struggle indeed. Thank you so much, Ka Julie De Lima, for your continued dedication to the movement and the struggle